What can we learn about solving puzzles, solving problems, discovering truth, and discovering those literal and metaphorical treasures from Sherlock Holmes? Yes, I know. I get it. Sherlock Holmes is not a real person. He didn't actually exist, but Sir Conan Doyle did create this character and represented him over and over and over again. And he represented a way of solving crimes and discovering things that other people missed. And if you piece together the way that he thought and he operated, you actually get some pretty fascinating and important strategies that we can all use. You don't have to be a genius. You can actually practice all of these things and get a little bit better at them. Maybe you can't get to a genius level, but if you start practicing one, you can get a lot better than you are today. I mean, that kind of growth mindset helps us all in most aspects of our lives. So when we look at Sherlock Holmes, he used a lot of different approaches. Sometimes he'd start with a general assumption and use a general truth or rule, and from that he would discover other things. It's called deduction. Sometimes he'd start from a series of specific instances, and from that come up with a general conclusion. That's called inductive thinking, and there's even some called abduction, where you're trying to figure out what's the most likely, the most probable thing to have happened. Because oftentimes when we're making real-world decisions, we don't have all of the facts in front of us. So we're going to have to deal with some gray areas and some uncertainties, and just figure out what's the most likely best option here, or most likely solution or explanation. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about 5 things that I've noticed in the Sherlock Holmes books that we see from this fictional character that we can actually make a part of the real characters that are each of us. So first one is to train your attention. Holmes really had this sharp perception. There was one book, The Blue Carbuncle, where he deduces an entire man's life from a battered hat. Now that's maybe a little bit far. I know there was another one where he'll look at these really nuanced clues and he observes them, and from that he can tell sort of a whole life story. And we see that being represented. It's a common kind of theme that you see in the way they build characters in a lot of murder mystery films and crime-solving TV shows and movies, where they make these genius and brilliant people. Now, while some of that is a bit exaggerated, we can start to identify and observe small things, like what are the little scratches here and there, and just practice observing what seem like maybe not particularly important pieces of data. Just looking closely, zooming in areas, and making a mental note or even jotting down the small things that you observe, and then spending a little time thinking about, what might this tell me? Some mud on the shoes. Well, it tells me that they were somewhere where there was mud. How recently? I can't tell. But at least I know they were somewhere where there was mud. That's just a little bit of a clue. But what if everywhere in the area there doesn't seem to be any mud? Well, and they must have been somewhere further away, perhaps. So you get the idea. Training yourself to pay attention to small things. I notice some people that do that. I have a friend who was in the military, and he seems to always notice shoes and how shined the shoes are or are not. And I just don't even pay attention to those kinds of things. But some people do, and I know some people are more attentive to what others wear and what they wear and how their hair is and isn't. So just learning to pay attention to some of those nuances with the idea that they might give you clues to something that could be really important or helpful. The second one, and I really love this, I did not start doing it until about 15, maybe 20 years ago, I guess, and I'm in my 50s. And it's the idea of the mind palace. I became intrigued by these people who would memorize these vast amounts of numbers and facts and lists of unrelated terms and phrases, But you'll notice that Sherlock Holmes sometimes used a mind palace to remember key clues or key bits of information and to keep it in his mind. Of course, writing things down can be helpful too. And I've actually used this. For example, I will pick a mind palace. The idea behind it is you pick a place that you know very, very well, like from your childhood. So I pick my childhood home. And I will start at the front door of my childhood home. I'll open the door, I'll walk in, I'll go up the 5 steps, and I'll walk into the kitchen, and then I'll walk through the kitchen, past the bathroom, and then into my bedroom. And I have this specific spot. And so what I do with this, what it's called the mind palace or the memory palace, is I will store key items in different parts of that room. So I'll imagine myself walking into the door, and there is a bag of salmon that's hanging on the front door. And as I walk in the door and I go into the steps, I'm getting ready to walk on the first step. But before I do, there's a big bottle of soda that's sitting there, and so I have to pick that soda up. And then I get to the door to go into the kitchen, and right there in the kitchen, all over the floor are little popcorn seeds that are all over the place. And then as I walk through past the bathroom, I notice something really, really kind of strange, that the toilet is full of ice cream. Now, I just gave you 4 things. If you closed your eyes, do you think you could list the 4 items that I described? Salmon. What was the second one that was on the steps? Can you remember? So the first one was salmon. The second one on the steps, soda. You walk into the kitchen. What do you see on the floor? Popcorn. And then you go to the bathroom, and what do you see in the toilet? Ice cream. Now, I used an absurdist approach here, and it allowed me to remember a simple list of 4 items, but I can do that generally with up to 10 or 12 items and put it in my memory palace and walk through a space like that. And by putting the items in different places, it allows me to remember them far more easily. And that was something that Sherlock Holmes did, and it got me thinking, and I became intrigued a number of years ago when these memory competitions were coming about, and I read a few books on it. And the Memory Palace actually works, and I use it quite regularly. Even though I don't consider myself to be someone with an amazing memory, I can remember some basics using some tools and tactics like that, some strategies like that. The third one that I noticed with him is he was pretty good as a character separating observation from assumption. And this is hard. And I know that this is even used, I believe, in mental health and other things like that. So when I walk into a room and I see someone that's sitting there and maybe their arms are crossed, do I assume that they're angry, or can I just observe, there's a person sitting there, they're not smiling, they're not frowning, and their arms are crossed. Can I just objectively name it instead of jumping to the assumption of what was happening? Observing versus assuming. The fourth one is a controlled imagination. So one thing that Sherlock Holmes does is he'll describe a scenario, and he'll imagine and tell the story in 2 or 3 different versions of the story. And then from that, try to figure out which one is most likely. You don't attach to a story, but you just try to piece it together to see if it helps you see or imagine or catch something you would have missed otherwise. And then the last one is just delay judgment until the evidence fits. So Sherlock Holmes was really good. He'll collect the information. He'll maybe do some different scenarios, but he won't make the final judgment until he's really collected as much evidence and he's found how they seem to connect the best. And then you can try to take your shot at a solution. There you have it. Try those 5 strategies and you're on your way to becoming a real living Sherlock Holmes. Looking forward to your comments. Thanks.